and we'll let people. This meeting is being recorded in case you missed that. Just in the interest of time, I will continue the introductions while people trickle in. So, hello everyone, I'm Neela Mazmat, I'm Operations Coordinator at EDGE, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's workshop on fundraising strategies and grant writing for social enterprise. I see people are coming in slowly and gradually. And today we will have Rohit Mehta from the first part of this series of workshop, talking about grant writing 101. Before I introduce Rohit Mehta and talk a bit about EDGE, we would like to acknowledge that the land in which we gather has been and still is the traditional territory of several indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendite, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Craig First Nation. Since time immemorial, numerous indigenous nations and indigenous peoples have lived and passed through this territory. We recognize this territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and the Trumpo Wampum Treaty, which emphasizes the importance of joint stewardship, peace, and respectful relationships. Sheridan and EDGE affirm that it is our collective responsibility to honor and respect those who have gone before us, those who are here, and those who have yet to come. We're grateful for the opportunity to work and live on this land. For those of you, or for Mike, really, if you don't know about EDGE, EDGE is where impact and entrepreneurship thrive. EDGE supports a vibrant community of change makers and entrepreneurs who want to create a more equitable and just life. In collaborations with our partner, EDGE provides founders with mentorship, learning programs, co-working space, and support to access funding. If anyone's interested in joining our community as a member, please check out our website at edge.sheridancollege.ca. For those of you on the call, it will be in the chat. Omar will post it, or you can connect with Omar or myself. To give a brief background of what EDGE has done so far and how many founders have we worked with, since our launch in 2018, we have worked with 303 founders who collectively made 257 ventures and created 650 jobs. They've raised over $8.4 million in sales and investments. Currently, 73% of our ventures identify as social enterprises, and 70% of our ventures are led by underrepresented founders. Over the last few years, we have seen over 11,000 people participate in our sessions, workshops, and programs. As I said, EDGE supports early-stage impact entrepreneurs who are committed to increasing triple bottom line. If anyone's interested in joining our community as a member, currently we have 2 cohort-based programs open right now. Omar will share a link to the programs page in the chat. First one is for early-stage impact ventures, exploring and validating their ideas. If that is someone that you are, please check out our LEAP program. The applications are currently open and the applications close on the 25th of July. We also have an exciting RISE program that offers intensive coaching and mentoring for social ventures who have demonstrated traction. This program is valued at $6,000 and is heavily subsidized by our funders. If this is something that if this is a space where you as an entrepreneur are and your venture has had traction, please consider applying to this opportunity. The applications are currently open and close on the 25th of July. We also run a program for shared instruments called Explore, which is relaunching in fall. And we're also very pleased to be working with RBC Future Launch on Social Impact Catalyst program, where we work with youth budding entrepreneurs to launch their social futures. A few housekeeping reminders for today. Please remain mute during the session. If possible, please turn on your camera. Unfortunately, I broke my camera today. I'm not on camera, but if you can, if it's possible for you, please turn on your camera. There are live closed captions on today's session. If there are any questions, please submit them in the chat. Any technical difficulties, please reach out to Omar or myself. The session is recorded And last but not the least, if you miss anything, we'll be posting links and information in the chat. And it is not presentation my slide. Good. Now about the speaker and facilitator of the day, we have the very amazing Rohit Mehta, who facilitated part one of the same workshop last week. Rohit is the founder and president of Do Good Fundraising. As a graduate of the University of Toronto, Rohit has been active in the nonprofit sector for 16 years. He was appointed to a 5-year term with the grant review team of the Ontario Tribune Foundation and served a 2-year term with the Grant Review Committee of the Ministry of Children and Youth Services Youth Opportunities Fund. Rohit has viewed and assessed over 300 grant applications and distributed over $60 million in funding to community-based nonprofits, charities, and grassroots groups. Rohit brings an additional 5 years of frontline experience working in fundraising roles with several nonprofits and charitable organizations, and has spent over a decade volunteering as a board member and a leader within the sector. I will now stop sharing my screen and pass the mic to Rohit.
Thanks very much, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on part 2 today of this workshop, which is presented with Sheridan Edge and Do Good Fundraising. It's really good to be back, and I hope everyone's ready to learn quite a bit at today's session. So just getting into the presentation here, we're going to be talking about Grant Writing 101. And this presentation will give you a deep insight into how to write funding applications and some step-by-step supports on what to do with budgets and work plans. So my bio has already been read. I'm not going to cover this again, but I do bring quite a bit of experience in grant review, being on the funder side, and grant writing, running a grant writing business. Do Good Fundraising offers 3 main services: all-inclusive grant writing, that's where we write your grants from start to finish; prospect research, where we help you find grants; and professional development training, where we provide training and workshops similar to what we're doing right now, all with the goal of helping you raise more money. And with today's workshop, we're not representing any of the funders that I might mention or the institutions. This information is being shared with Ed Sheridan members, students, faculty, staff, and the general public. Hope you enjoy. So here's a little bit about what you can expect during today's session. We'll start by talking about the steps that you could take in order to create very strong funding applications and budgets and that sort of thing. We'll talk about the essential components that you need to know when you're coming up with either a work plan or a budget, and we'll actually go through a step-by-step exercise where I'll show you how to create these very important elements of a grant application. And in the end, I'll end with some tips on your next best funding application. We'll cover a few questions, and throughout the presentation, I encourage you to use the chat and ask questions. Please ask questions, because that's what this is all about. I wish we were in a room together. It's unfortunate that we're not, but we can always pretend. So let's get into it. We'll begin with the steps required to create a strong funding application. Before we do that, I want to make sure that everyone has an understanding of what is a funding application. So as a business owner or a social enterprise, a funding application is really your expression of an interest in what a funder is offering. It could be a corporation, it could be a foundation, it could be the government, whatever that might be. You're essentially saying that you're interested in aligning with what they're offering, and it's a way to formally present your concept or your idea or your innovation to that funder. So think of it as an introduction to you as an entrepreneur and an introduction to the funding opportunity for your business. And really, with any new relationship, you need to take a lot of time and effort into forming that relationship, into forming the good first impression and the first step. And so it's so important that we take time to do that, and that's what we'll be covering here. Now, we talked about this last workshop. These are the key elements of a proposal, right? So a proposal starts with an executive summary, a problem statement. What are the goals or targets that you're aiming to achieve? How do you plan to achieve those targets? What is your plan? As a business, you should be talking about your financial forecasts. How are you planning to bring in money? What are you planning to spend? What's your competitive edge, right? So what makes your business or your product or service unique, and how does it compare to the competitors? You'll include contact information and attachments. And this is usually when an application form is not provided. Many times funders these days provide application forms or very detailed questions for you to answer. So things to consider here: credible evidence, effective research, having detailed budgets, having some sort of rationale for what you bring to the table through your innovation, a real focus or emphasis on outcomes, and making sure that there's supplementary materials. Let's go through each of these in detail. So on funding applications, you always want to provide credible evidence to justify your project or your application for funding and why it's important. I really believe that having statistics and research are absolutely essential to a strong grant application. And so I encourage you to start by putting together a justification for whatever it is that you plan to do, and that you bring statistics or research into that work. So this can include quantitative, which means numbers, and qualitative evidence, which is more people's opinions, observations, verbal details, essentially evidence that proves the need for your project, but not in a number format. You also want to ensure that you present data which confirms that the problem in your problem statement is actually a problem and relates to a real issue in the market or in your sector, right? So when it comes to research, where would you start, right? When you're trying to come up with effective research, well, you need to make sure that it's specific to your community and where your customers are located. And as a social enterprise, you want to make sure that the research relates to the issue that you're addressing. Let's say you're addressing food insecurity in a community. You know, you're going to start some sort of a food truck, for instance, to tackle food insecurity. Okay. You want to make sure that there's credible sources of this data or these statistics without biases, right? So when you're getting information on hunger, you might want to get a stat from a government source as opposed to a fast food restaurant. Making sure your research is relevant and timely, right? So making sure it's current. And now that COVID-19 has taken place, it's a whole new way of operating, especially in the food service industry. Things have changed so much. And so you want to make sure that the information that you gather is still relevant to your work. You always want to create a sense of urgency. And we spoke about this in the last workshop about the importance of urgency to make your research or your entire funding application more effective. And you want to make sure that your research motivates the reviewers to act. And how are they going to act? Well, ideally, they're going to give you the funding. In addition, customer surveys can be really great. So that can present quantitative and qualitative information that you can use in your funding applications. For example, a customer satisfaction survey. The last time you did something innovative, you could then take that information and use it next time you want to do something innovative. Census data is quite effective. Census data is longitudinal data that's taken over time, and the data is meant to provide trends and insights on what happens to Canadians over time across various factors. You can always take this information and put it into your application to paint a picture, right? Maybe in this food truck example, the community you serve, particularly Brampton, has been highly susceptible to COVID-19. And maybe you draw some data from the census about income or other disparities that individuals might face, and you help paint a picture as to why that neighborhood has issues with food insecurity, and that's why your social enterprise business wants to set up a food truck. Now, federal government and provincial government websites have significant research and information. You can often start there when you're looking for good quality data and statistics. The other one is local industry associations. So whether you work in manufacturing or fashion or food or energy, you often have an association that brings together all of those professionals and acts as a voice to represent them. These associations tend to have great data and great statistics, and you should get in touch with them, especially if you pay membership fees. In addition, we should start looking at other things that make up an effective application, such as a detailed budget. So what do you need to know? Well, in a detailed budget, you need to, of course, identify revenues and expenses. You should always have estimates for very high expenses or larger expenses, and that would allow you to provide a detailed breakdown. We'll explore this later in the workshop. You should indicate all costs associated with your project or grant application, even if they are indirect. You should start with a realistic budget period and state that period from start to finish, so that if your project application is going in next week, it would probably be realistic that your project would start in September, October, even November, but it would not make sense that if your grant application was starting next week, that you stated your budget period. If your grant application was being submitted next week, that you stated that your budget period started next week. That would not make sense. Now, I put an asterisk next to revenue because a lot of us business owners forget that we need to include investors, your own savings, and even sweat equity when you're considering the revenue and expenditure, especially in an early stage grant application. They want to know if you're putting some money into your own project, or if you're putting your time, or if somebody else has put in money as well. Now, newspaper clippings, and video overviews. That could even be you talking about your business. An example that I wanted to share was something I saw in the local paper. And so let's say you're applying to a grant that is all about a young entrepreneur who may have been impacted by COVID, and you want to show that your business was impacted by COVID. This individual, Barbara, who's featured in this article, can clearly demonstrate that not only was the business impacted by COVID, but she did something about it. And what I thought was great about the business, which is called Picnics in the Six, with the number 6, is that the entrepreneur was able to pivot, and to be picked up, by the newspaper is really a big deal. And I think that that is the sort of thing that you should include in a grant application, because it shows that you're taking initiative, you're making a difference, and it is a great attachment and a great supplement to a grant. Let's move on and now talk about the essential components of a work plan and budget. And I'm just letting you know there are going to be some numbers in this section, so you've been warned for those of you who don't like numbers. And I think we don't need to be afraid of numbers or work plans. I think that we need to take time to understand why the funder has chosen these tools to learn about our businesses. And it's because it makes it easy to compare businesses. But if you want to be successful in grant applications, you have to take the time to understand the process of writing a work plan or a budget. We write a lot of grants, and every single grant we write tends to have a work plan in some form and a budget. When it comes to developing a work plan, I really challenge you to plan your projects as a business. Set aside 6 months for the next year and decide what's going to happen in those 6 months. Get very specific and determine how much money do you need for each activity, what's going to be done, who's going to do that work, when will it be done, where will it take place. And what we like to do in prospect research when we look for funding is to do a focused search this year so that we can fund next year. The unfortunate reality is that most grants are spaced out about 2 to 4 months from the date that you apply to the fund until the date that you receive the funding. So this can be a real challenge for businesses when many of us are paycheck to paycheck. But luckily, with some good planning, you can be ready for grants that will come next year, even if you have to apply this year. So there's a few things in work plans, and these are some of the common categories you'll see along the top. It's like a chart. And so I think some of you may or may not be familiar with these terms. Milestones refer to key moments in time for your project. Activities are the activities. What are you actually doing? Timelines. When does that specific activity start and end? And the next one, and so on. Person responsible. This may be you, but in some businesses, there are more than one persons responsible for various actions. And so the funder wants to know who's responsible. Then there's objectives, outputs, and outcomes. And objectives are quite broad. Outputs are usually numerical, and they're very simple numbers. How many customers? How many food baskets do we sell? Outcomes are a little bit more involved, and that has to do with changes that you are seeing or experiencing as a result of your work. Social enterprises take note. This is a very important concept to have outcomes as a result of your social enterprise and as a result of the work that you're doing. It's absolutely essential to demonstrate to funders and other parties that your work is truly making a difference. So it is important to take time to understand what outcomes you're achieving and then to document that as part of the funding opportunity and make sure that the funder understands you're not only making a difference, but here's how. So let's get into it now, and we'll start with looking at a work plan. So this is an example, and you'll see the different headings that I mentioned to you along the top. And so you will have charts like this appear on your funding applications, and you need to fill it in. Here's how we do it. You might want to start with milestones, okay? So in this example of a food truck that will be addressing food insecurity in Brampton, we would be setting up, maybe setting up equipment, supplies. We will be marketing, hiring somebody to work with us, and then launching. Okay, this is a very simplified work plan. You usually want to get into more detail, but there's a limited amount of space. So I just kept it simple. So what are some of the activities we might do? Well, as part of setup, you're going to need to purchase some supplies and equipment. You're certainly going to be processing food. You want to make sure that you're following guidelines. And so you might need sanitation and cleaning supplies, professional equipment. This can be quite costly. Under marketing, you want to consider how are you going to get the word out about this new venture. You're probably going to want to promote on social media and on your website. And again, there's a cost to this. Hiring will be one of your key costs. And you probably recognize that this work is going to be intense. So for the launch, you plan to hire a support staff. And then of course comes the launch. So when are you doing all of these activities? Well, the activities would start this December. You recognize that the funder is going to take a few months to get back to the applicants. And so beginning in December, you will begin to purchase the supplies and equipment. From January to March, you're going to promote extensively through the website and social media, as we mentioned. In April, you will actually hire your support staff, and then you'll begin selling in May. So you see how we're in a workshop in July, and we're planning to start selling in May. That level of foresight is what's going to help you bring in dollars through grants, loans, and other contribution programs if you choose to plan ahead. Now, who's responsible for all this? It might be you, the founder, the owner, so you can put that in there. But at a certain point, you begin to hire staff, and that's when you can implement the support staff into the person's responsible column. So at the end is your objectives or outputs or outcomes. You will never see all three. You will most likely see one of these. And sometimes they're identified with other names. There's a lot of names for what you can achieve as a result of your work plan. But all you need to know is that the funder is looking for a way to measure what you're achieving through each activity. So as part of the setup, as a result of the setup, a burger press is purchased along with other equipment and supplies. Under marketing, we decide to set up a weekly social media marketing campaign on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Under hiring, we will search for and hire one part-time support staff member. And finally, we'll begin our sales in May. And I did not put an end date on that, but you can certainly put an end date from May until the end of the grant term. So as you can see, a work plan can be a lot of work, but it doesn't have to be daunting. If we start thinking now about what we're doing next year, this all becomes very clear and organized. Are there any questions about this concept so far? Great, let's keep going. I'm going to now talk about budget development, and we're actually going to practice developing a budget together. In my work as a grant writer and fundraising professional, I've been amazed to see that many people are nervous about budgets and numbers. I've reviewed over 300 budgets on my own, and I can tell you that the more you do this work, the easier it becomes. So there's revenues and expenses, also known as expenditures. And this is pretty standard on most grants. Sometimes they will appear stacked, one on top of the other, where revenues have to be identified first and then expenses, or vice versa. And many times they don't just have a blank box, they actually have a box for the numbers and then another box for the description. So you want to consider that complexity that you might see. And so I'm seeing a question here from Evelyn. If I want to show you my budget to be reviewed, how can I contact you? So certainly we'll talk at the end of the session about how you can get additional support, but certainly there are ways to get additional help from people like myself, in addition to Ed Sheridan. We'll talk more about that, Evelyn. So getting into the budget here, you want to make sure that your revenue equals expenditures or expenses. This is extremely important because funders will not give money to an entrepreneur unless they're planning to spend it. And this concept was something that hit me the very first time I saw it, because I thought, well, it's a business. Of course, they're supposed to make a profit. But funders often believe that when they're funding a project, it should be neutral. The money that comes in should be equal to the money that goes out, because they think that if they're giving you tons of money and you're not using it, then why should they give it to you? They can give it to someone who needs it. So always make sure your revenue is equal to your expenditure, and that is total revenue equals total expenditure. So on the revenue side, I've just made up some numbers here for us to follow. Let's say we did sales of 25 packages of food, sorry, $25 worth and 100 packages of food. So that's $2,500. Just moving along here in this example, the entrepreneur does some speaking gigs at $100 per gig. They're contributing some savings of $1,500, and the grant request itself is $3,000. Sorry, I just had to interrupt for a second. That's better. The grant request is $3,000. So $7,500 in total on the revenue side. And again, this is absolutely an example. There is no reason to put any of these numbers in your own budget, but you will note that I have provided a cost breakdown on the left-hand side to say, what is the unit price and what is the quantity? This is extremely important and something most people miss when they're putting together budgets. Many people will write sales, 2,500, without indicating how they got to that number or why. And obviously this is condensed for the purposes of the presentation. When you are putting together a budget, you should write additional detail, such as $25 times 100 packages, or you could write multiple items. For instance, let's say one item was $5 and you were selling 100 of those. And then another item was $20 and you were selling 100 of those. Providing that math in the cell is going to show the funder that you took the time to think about how you came up with these values. And it's not only more believable, it shows that you're more organized. Notice that I included the grant request in the revenue section. So the grant request of $3,000 appears in revenue, and all together, that's $7,500. Now let's look at the other side. So on the expenses side, you have equipment and supplies, $1,100. Social media marketing, $100 per week estimated times 16 weeks. And that would mean that Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter paid advertising is inputting $100 every week for 16 weeks in order to promote the business. One part-time staff at $15 per hour times 10 hours per week, right? So you would ideally write all of that information in there, times 16 weeks. So if you do the math on that, that's $2,400. And you would put in your own salary as a owner, founder, operator of the business. For this example, to keep it nice and simple, I just wrote 2,400. So if you add that all up, that's 7,500. And what a coincidence, 7,500 on the left equals 7,500 on the right. So it's very important that you make sure that your budget balances and that you provide as much detail as possible. Now let's talk about your next best funding application, and I'll share some tips that you might find helpful next time you're applying for funding or a grant of any sort for your business. Firstly, be very selective. There are tons of financial support programs, and more of them will be opening up now that the economy is reopening. And so you should only choose a program that you believe in, that you align with, and that is a great fit for your business needs. If you don't support a certain type of industry, but now they're giving funds, you don't necessarily need to take that grant. There will be other grants available for you to receive funding from. I talk to a lot of nonprofits and charities about being mission focused, and I encourage business owners, especially social enterprises, to have a mission and stay committed to achieving your mission. If you focus on a mission as a business and you set out your business goals, funders will see this focus and they'll see what you're trying to achieve. Many times, entrepreneurs tend to do too much, or they're not focused in one direction, and that can come across on a funding application. So I encourage that you truly stay on course and stay committed to that mission. And plan ahead. As I demonstrated, to get funding to start selling in May of next year, you might have to work on a grant right now. That's why it helps to plan out your next fiscal year and to use cash flow projections to plan out all the budgeted expenses and revenues that you're planning to bring in. In my business, we look at cash flow every week and we go through our budget, and every month we go all the way to the end of the year and even into next year to make sure we're on track. In terms of other advice on grant writing, we did talk in the last workshop about urgency. It's so important to express urgency in your work and use persuasive language. With this grant, we will be able to, as a result of this grant, without this grant, we would not be able to, right? So convince the funder that this is absolutely needed by your business. And hopefully that persuasive language will come across at the grant review table. You should also keep a folder, maybe a digital folder, of documents such as a plan of all of your projects or programs, an operating budget for your business, as some funders can ask for this, although it is rare, and financial statements, which don't need to be audited. They don't need to be done by a professional accountant. Your financial management system, such as Wave, which we use in our business, can certainly help produce these statements. If you don't have a system, you can do it in Excel. The other piece of advice when it comes to grant writing is to describe the impact of COVID-19 on your business. Most grants right now have what I call a COVID flavor. So they encourage business owners who've been impacted by COVID to address those impacts and to make a case as to why their business needs funds as a result of the pandemic. Many businesses have closed or reduced operations, and so it's so important to describe that impact on your business so that you receive some priority over the entrepreneurs who maybe grew their business during the pandemic. Continuing along, you want to make sure that you double check errors in your applications to avoid spelling and grammar. There's nothing more frustrating than a grant reviewer looking at an application and not being able to read it because of basic issues. And you can often avoid this by using Google Docs or Word to author the grant application and look for the little squiggly red line that indicates that there's an error. And Google now autocorrects as you type. So there's quite a bit of help available. Grammarly is another resource. You also want to ensure that minimum jargon is used throughout the grant application text. And the reason I mention jargon is because acronyms in your industry or your field might be common to you, but to other individuals and the average people who are reviewing your grants, they might not understand. And so you want to put yourself in their shoes, somebody who doesn't work in fashion or design or energy. They might have no idea what the acronyms mean, which you may use every day. So you want to use very minimal jargon. If you have to use an acronym, explain it, or maybe write out the whole acronym multiple times. You also want to review your applications to make sure that you directly answered a question. And so it's important that when you write an answer to a grant question, that you answer it right away. You don't want tons and tons of paragraphs of text and statistics and preamble, sometimes known as fluff. You just want to get to the point, answer the question, because grant reviewers are often reviewing multiple grants and they might not have time to read the entire answer. They might just be skimming and looking for the brief answer to the question. So putting myself in your shoes, you might be saying, I don't know what to plan for in my work plan. Help. And I really encourage you to get in touch with Edge Sheridan to work on your business plan. Even when I started my business, I went to the local entrepreneur center and I was so confident with my business plan, and with a red pen, there were lots of marks made all over the plan. And when I left, I had a lot of homework to do. And so the plan became better and better every time I spoke to the representative of the center. And you can certainly get that sort of help as well. Now, when you're planning for your work plan or your activities, make sure you focus on 2 or 3 key activities which will definitely generate revenue for your business, and try and put your attention and focus into those. You might have a million different things that you can do as a business, but even as you saw at the start of my presentation, there's really 3 key things that we do, and you should also attempt to focus on those things. Now, in my business, we do grants, right? If you ask, what do we do? Grants is what we're known for. It's also a type of fundraising, which is in the name. And I really encourage you to make sure that your business specializes in something. It makes the entire process of grant writing easier because you have a common thread going throughout the business. I should also say that when you're considering activities or different lines of business that you plan to focus on and write about in your work plan, consider the time and effort it takes to achieve that. Consider the financial resources that might be needed and your own sweat equity, day-to-day time that might be required to achieve that activity. And ideally, you should choose projects that are attainable and realistic within a short amount of time. If your project is very big, such as wanting to design a brand new car and get it to the market, your funder might not see that as achievable or attainable. However, if you plan to maybe rent an existing vehicle and turn it into something like a food truck, that is probably something you can achieve within a reasonable time frame. So as long as you're considering that sort of time and effort, you will definitely have some success in putting together your work plan. I'm not good with numbers. What should I do? So many people are not good with numbers. I have to say that as a fundraising professional myself, I look at a lot of numbers, but that doesn't always mean that I'm able to be on top of every single spreadsheet and document And that's why I brought on a finance student, actually a Sheridan College student, and he's been a huge help. We hired him full-time. And so having somebody like that through an institution like Sheridan can be an excellent way to supplement the knowledge on your team. We were also able to help the student to gain relevant experience in a business. And in the last presentation, I may have mentioned some opportunities for you to obtain student help through various educational institutions. And so I think getting in touch with a local college or university is a great next step. Now, at the same time, having an accountant, a contract accountant, or if your business is big enough, having an accountant on staff can be extremely helpful. Accountants specialize in finance. They're very good with numbers. And so having that type of support is going to be absolutely crucial in getting your business to the next level. It also will be very helpful to get support from the team at Edge. So they are experts in budgets and work plans. They could probably be delivering this workshop as well. And I really encourage you to speak to your mentors there so that you can get that support and guidance. And the best part is that it's free. And so I do encourage you to get out there and connect with the help that's available to you. And of course, other institutions and companies and businesses like Do Good Fundraising do exist, but you should go to your local entrepreneur center first. And of course, if you do want hands-on support with grants, loans, you can always get together with colleagues who work out of this space at Ed Sheridan or virtually now, and begin working on grant and loan applications together. I find that's a really great way to share ideas, and of course they are competitive, but working on the questions of the process together can be helpful. Talk to the team at Ed Sheridan. If this is the type of help you need, they can refer you to grant writers, right? So we would prefer that you reach out to Edge first if you want help from an organization like ours, and let them know that you need that help. They seek this type of feedback from entrepreneurs so that they can design their programs and their services to meet your needs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions and discussion. And I want to thank you for your time so far. My name is Rohit, and I'm with Do Good Fundraising.
Thank you so much for that, Rohit. Anyone that has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself, or if you cannot unmute yourself or speak during the call, please feel free to type that in the chat. Sam has a question, so even if we're not Edge members, we can still receive help through them. Edge provides services to its members. We would highly encourage you to join our open programs. This is the LEAP program and the RISE program. Some LEAP is open for the next cohort right now. So if you're interested in that, you can apply to that. You can reach out to us and we can see if there are sector resources available. But Edge services are unfortunately focused on the members.
Maybe if you haven't asked a question, you can take a moment to write down something that you learned in today's session or something that you found interesting. I encourage everyone who's listening on the session to use the chat box to give some sort of feedback. Almost makes it feel like we're all in the same room together.
Hello. Hi, Rohit.
Hi. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for, helping me to understand certain concepts. I wanted to ask you, I myself is a grant writer. I do write for the art companies, particularly art and culture. But I wanted to know that, what kind of grant, if you have grant writers, and I have variety of clients with me as well, but I don't know what kind of help you provide. What are the fields that you focus on?
Mm. Yeah, so great question. We focus on a number of fields broadly. So we work with businesses, social enterprise businesses, charities and nonprofits, and artists, right? So within social enterprise businesses, as long as you're doing good work, we want to work with you. When it comes to charities and nonprofits, again, doesn't matter what you're doing in the community, we work with you. And artists, most of our artists are visual artists, performing artists, musicians, generally that category.
So because I have my behavior therapy degree as well with me. So that that segment is very, very close to my heart. So I wear many hats in terms of artist and art organization. I have grant writing experience of more than 6 years. I am connected with Canada Council, Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council, all of them. And everywhere you see on their portal, you're going to see my name. But my coming to this workshop is to introduce myself, to learn more from you, because every day is a learning. And at the same time, when like-minded people, same professionals, when they get together and when they brainstorm, a lot of things, and you are very experienced. But at the same time, I wanted to ask you, how do you reach out to people, those who are in disability? Because they are the field, they need the support. And I am a professional. On one hand, I have grant writing experience. And on the other hand, I know that is a segment needs money the most.
Mm. Mm.
So I wanted to ask you, do you have that segment with you? Like, do you help them? And if not, if you can explore further and extend your help to them as well.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. I will admit that we have not reached out to the disability sector as a whole. Certainly, there's one or two organizations I can think of that we have spoken to and offered our services to help. But now that you mention it, yeah, there are very few disability-focused organizations that you work with, and it's a really interesting point. There's a show that I watch often on TVO called Employable Me. I'm not sure if anyone listening has heard about it, but I think if we can give opportunities as business owners to people who may present with any sort of a disability, physical or intellectual, I think that we can really raise the bar. And of course, doesn't matter what sort of disability people have, they are often very great contributors to business.
Absolutely.
And so no, I'm interested in exploring that some more. Feel free to reach out to me if you'd like.
I'm a behavior therapist. So part-time I work with them. My basic idea is to work with them on the floor, like what their problems are, how can I help them after getting my 4 years degree. But what I realized that you kind of people or my kind of people, if we get together and add some more people segment who really needs help, that would be great. At the same time, I have seen a lot of black sheeps. What they do under the banner of mental health, no doubt they attend your kind of workshop, they approach me, or maybe they're approaching somebody else, and under the mental health banner they actually say that it is awareness program, but awareness, those people are not getting any money, so that government money is being wasted. You know what I mean?
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So what I want is that actual money reaching out to actual segment.
Yeah, I think it warrants a separate discussion between you and I about how those of us who run social enterprise businesses that help other businesses, other charities, other social enterprises, other artist businesses, how can we do that? So I do encourage you to reach out, and I would be interested in chatting more about this theme.
And in your workshop, if you can also add one segment which says do's and don'ts, in that you can say that don't do this.
Yeah, definitely something to consider for next time.
It
Do you
is
have an
just,
example?
I
Maybe that
just thought to share with you, nothing.
I think it's a good one. Do you have an example of a do's or don'ts that you may
Yeah,
have?
I can give you one example.
Mhm.
Is this whichever banner you choose, but if actual segment is not benefiting from this, please don't go for it. The way you said
Mm.
right now when I was that, talk something about attainable, talk something realistic, talk something honest. Because these are all taxpayers' money,
Right.
which we want people to utilize to 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 enrich our society, to help each other, not to misuse it. Like I have seen a lot of organizations, what they do, they are doing some kind of activity underneath, but the banner talks about something else.
Mm.
Because grant is available, they modify and they customize accordingly, you know.
I've
So
seen
if you
this.
can also mention here that that's not something we as a society encourage, you know, it is just a thought which I thought to share with you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's a great insight. And I think these have been great points. And so on two fronts, one is I encourage you to chat with me to see how we can collaborate to help
Yes,
the disadvantaged
absolutely.
sectors. And the other is a great point for everyone, which is if you're applying for a grant, make sure it's with honest intentions and you're going to do what you say, because that would be
Like genuineness, what I'm saying, so that you also feel good about it when you go to bed. You feel I did something good today. And the money which I wanted, I got it, but I will be able to utilize. I'm not saying you don't get paid. You get paid, but others also should be benefited from this. So just wanted to share with you. Definitely, I'm going to reach out to you. Very, very enlightening workshop from you. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. It's nice to meet you.
Same here.
Thank you so much, Swachi. And Rohit, there's a comment, there's a question in the chat that went a bit up. So Elizabeth sent a question that said, Rohit, do you use any paid resources or databases when you're researching grants? Or can you find what you need from open resources?
Okay. Do I use any paid resources or databases? I do. I paid quite a bit of money to access Foundation Search software, which is a prospect research software which we use to find grant opportunities. It's the most expensive thing I've ever paid for in my business besides staff. So we provide that service. What we'll do is we'll use that as a reference, and then we provide a service where any social enterprise business or charity nonprofit or even artist who is looking for funds, we can then go in there, and by we I mean me, spend a few hours doing research, reaching out to those funders. Sometimes I'll write a report which then details what research we've done, and then I present that report. And that process is our prospect research service. And I've done a workshop before on prospect research itself. I will admit that if you have the time and energy, you can find what you need from open resources. However, there are funders that you will never find publicly because they choose to remain anonymous publicly, or they choose not to list themselves. I'll give you an example of a lottery winner who wins money. Many times they're not openly advertising that they have money because people are going to reach out to them and try and ask for it. In the same sense, there are some funders who have a lot of money. There's a funder that has over $100 million in assets and they don't have a website. And what this tells you is that there are various paid databases that contain their contact information, and they will purposely put their name and information in those paid databases because they know real applicants are going to pay money to access that, and then you can reach out to them and ask for funds. But can you find them through a Google search? Some of them, no. Most of them, yes. I would say most funders of any of the bodies that I've mentioned, you know, social enterprise, nonprofit, most of those funders, you can find them if you spend enough hours Google searching, but you also have to know how to do that search and what to look for. Prospect research is an art. It takes time, and this is why I recommend that people hire a professional prospect researcher like us when you're trying to do that work. And it works the same for businesses. If you're looking for opportunities, all the opportunities have lots of fine print. Some of them will not be applicable to you. And so it's so important that you go with someone who knows how to navigate that world of funding.
We also have a question from someone who asked if you can share names of some of the databases. I believe you also do prospect research. If you want to talk about your work around prospect research at Do Good, that'd be great. But
yeah, so certainly, and so I guess this is Wissam. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes.
So did you want to expand on your question a little bit?
Yeah. So right now we're pretty much at the stage we have our business plan, and we have not like it's non-functional prototype website. And we're just trying to get obviously like some grants to be able to launch the business before we reach out to any investors. And yes, because I tried to search it online, I couldn't really find like any grants or anything. So that's how pretty much I ended up here today, just to see how and like what to do. But the thing is, I missed the first 20 minutes, and that's why I wasn't sure if like you mentioned anything about it. It's just the link wasn't working for me. But so yeah, I'm just wondering that like if like what databases should we use, or if we use somebody, like what costs are we expecting?
Right.
Someone like yourself.
So certainly for prospect research, we charge $350 for that exercise where we'll spend about 5 hours doing research, reaching out to funders, writing the report, presenting it to you. That's something that we do right now.
Yeah.
Are there good databases for-profit businesses or social enterprises to access funding opportunities? No, there is not one good database that exists. We provide that service by going into the databases that are meant for nonprofits and charities. And a lot of the work we do is what I call groundwork. You're doing searches, you're getting in touch with funders. Sometimes we're calling them and asking, can you recommend other funders? It is I guess the idea of having a resource that is for businesses is something that is not well developed. It is a resource that is not in existence, as far as I know right now, for small businesses. If you are a big business, there are tons of government grants, loans, and incentives for manufacturing, research and development, import, export. Big businesses in every sector, from agriculture to manufacturing to robotics, they have massive grants available, and you don't have to look very far. The Government of Canada's website will show you all of those programs. When it comes to small businesses like ours, I find the reason why these directories don't exist is because the grant opportunities are small and few and far between.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why, it's no surprise that when the corporate sponsors give these grants, FedEx and TELUS and some of the banks, they are doing so as a marketing effort, but also because they have the money to give those grants. So economies fluctuate, which means that granting fluctuates. When the economy is good, they will be giving grants, but when the economy is bad, you won't see any of them. And so a lot of those databases would actually become irrelevant. And already I find some of the databases I go through, I find a lot of the information after COVID has become irrelevant because some foundations stopped granting, some took a pause. And so is there a good website where we can find these grants? No, but certainly through Ed Sheridan, you should be able to get emails with opportunities about funding as it comes up. And we also have a button on the bottom of our website where you can subscribe to updates as a business so that when we get funding opportunities, those who are subscribed will get access to those on an opportunity by opportunity basis.
Okay. So you said that you charge $350 for your service. That do you first like look into the business plan, see if it's possible to get grants for, or?
Of course. Yeah, we do quite a thorough process where we get to know the business, get to know what they do almost inside and out, and only then can we go out there and try and look for grants.
Okay.
Many entrepreneurs will be so early stage that they won't be at that point where they've developed a plan, or they won't have any milestones or any projections, and that can make it very hard to look for grants, because you really need to know what the business is planning to do in order to be able to find funding that's a perfect fit. And so I think the first step for any entrepreneur is to develop a great business plan. Take the months that are required to write it and edit and get it reviewed by mentors and edit it again. And then at that point, you will probably be ready to take the opportunities that come your way. And certainly there are various opportunities that are out there. There's one that I was looking at, which I'm just going to reference very quickly because it is a big one. And, I have it here. Okay, so American Express is offering grants to business owners in Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon. I just read this in the Mississauga News fairly recently. Black, Indigenous, and people of color business owners in Peel Region can apply for one of 100 grants that will be dispersed nationally from American Express Canada and another incubator. And so this is an example of something that I found out about through reading an article in the newspaper, right? That there's these $1 million in grants that they're giving out, and it comes with mentorship and training, that sort of thing. And so you wouldn't necessarily be able to find that in a database unless somebody is running a database that is very updated, and I haven't found one yet for business.
Oh, okay.
Wish I could help more, but that's sort of what I got so far.
No, that's helpful. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
So your website is posted here, right?
Yeah, I do recommend that you reach out to Ed Sheridan and let them know that you found the presentation helpful. They can do a referral, and that helps them quite a bit to know that somebody benefited from this. And it's sort of like a formal channel that we go through where you get
yeah, for sure.
from them. That would be great.
Thank you so much for that, Rohit. And Omer will be pasting a link to the feedback form where you can let us know and we can connect you. We'll also be sharing a recording of today's session in a follow-up email, and also Rohit's email. We'll ask Rohit first. We haven't yet asked him if he can share his email.
Absolutely.
And also a link to their website. Yeah, so you would definitely get that. If there are any other comments, any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. We'll have a couple of minutes.
Thanks so much, everyone. Please do take a moment to fill out the feedback form now. If you have a second, it's in the chat box, and it's been a pleasure being with you today. Oh, there's a question from Helen. Can you apply to some of these grants without being nonprofit? Yeah, certainly. An example is the grant that I just mentioned with American Express. So that grant is actually meant for business owners. And there are grants, which I've seen over the last year, that even though they were meant for nonprofits and charities, they also said that businesses can apply. Trying to remember the grant that I was just working on last week that specifically said that for-profit businesses can apply. They just need to have a partnership with a nonprofit. So every grant that's out there will very clearly indicate whether it's meant for nonprofit or for-profit or both or either. And so you need to make sure that you read the guidelines to understand the restrictions that are placed on applicants. Taking time to read the guidelines means you're more likely to be actually eligible for the grant and then apply. The worst thing you can do is to just apply without reading the guidelines, and it's quite a waste of time and energy. Thank you for all the comments, everyone. I really appreciate that. And I guess I'll turn it over to Ed Sheridan for any closing remarks.
Cool. I 100% agree and relate to the comments. Thank you so much, Rohit. It was amazing. I've worked with a fund for 4 years, and I still find these presentations so amazing. I loved the presentation. It was super helpful. And for everyone else, thank you so much for joining us. I really apologize for those who struggled with getting into the Zoom call. Our Zoom acted up, but today was not the most tech-friendly day. So I really appreciate your patience, and I really appreciate you joining us. Like I said, we'll be sending out the recording for the session and follow-up material in an email within the next 24 to 48 hours. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you so much for being here. And if you like the presentation, if you like this session, give us a shout out on the social media. Omer has posted links. And give Rohit a shout out, who we absolutely love. And we're so thankful that he took time out to speak with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.